So in this video, we're going to discuss chain loading and dual booting in Grub. Grub can be used to load other bootloaders, and it can also be used to boot non-Linux operating systems. Now, the list of support for non-Linux operating systems that Grub can boot without chain loading is actually fairly small. If you're installing Windows after Linux, be aware that Windows may clobber the bootloader if you're installing Windows and Linux on the same hard drive. And in that case, you may or may not be able to recover depending on the extent of the damage. This is really dependent on the version of Windows you're using. So here I'm at my Windows PC, and we need to take a look at the disk drives. Now you can see here that Windows recognizes quite a few volumes. Some of them don't have drive letters, and those are used for recovery. You can see the EFI volume that's being used here, because this is an EFI system. It doesn't have a drive letter. Our C drive, though, our Windows operating system drive does. Right here in the middle, we have this 2.36 gigabyte healthy partition, which should be more than enough space to install a basic version of CentOS. And so that's what we're going to do. Now, I'm going to restart my computer, and when I boot back up, I'm going to make sure to boot from the CentOS CD-ROM that's in the CD-ROM drive. Okay, now you can see that I booted off of my CentOS 7 CD-ROM. I'm going to go ahead and select the Install CentOS 7 option. And notice here that I'm selecting the I will configure partitioning option. You definitely don't want to tell CentOS to automatically create the partitions, or it'll wipe your hard drive. Now, you can see here that CentOS is telling us it's found some unknown partition types. When we looked earlier, we saw that there was an EFI partition, a recovery partition, and then we had our 2.3 gigabyte raw partition. So as we examine these, you can see some have labels, some have a partition type, but this one is actually completely raw. So we're going to install our CentOS in the raw partition, which was the partition right before our NTFS partition when we looked at it in Windows. You'll notice that I've chosen to reformat our raw partition to an ext4 file system. I've given it the label CentOS root and the root mount point. As well, the existing EFI partition I've told CentOS to mount at boot EFI. I have not specified a label for the EFI partition. Let's go ahead and click Done. Do a little housekeeping here, and let's start our installation. All right, so now our install is complete. Let's go ahead and reboot. Now you can see here that Grub has automatically added Windows to the bootloader. So we'll go in and log in as root, and let's see what that configuration looks like. And we're going to take a look first at etc sysconfig. And so these are our defaults. Let's go take a look at the actual Grub configuration. There's a menu entry and that's been added to the 30_OS Prober section. To get Windows to load properly, we tell Grub to insert some modules. You have the ability in Grub to insert modules just like you do into the Linux kernel. So here we insert the module that allows Grub to work with GPT partitions. We insert the module that allows Grub to work with FAT or MBR partitions. And now we tell it which partition to set as the root device. And in this case, we're telling it hard drive 0, and on the GPT partition table, the second partition available. And lastly, on our EFI partition, there's a special boot image used to load the Windows operating system and initialize that process so that Windows comes up. Now, if we look at our other entries for Linux, you can see we've got some similar things here. We're inserting the gzio module to decompress the kernel in the init_read image, the GPT partition, and the x2 module so that Grub can identify and work with the x2 partitions. Here we've got our kernel line. Okay, so now we've looked at Linux, and let's go ahead and go back to Grub, and let's boot into Windows. I'm going to change the timeout here so we've got a little bit more time to make that selection. And remember, when you're reconfiguring grub2, you have to issue the grub2 make config command. All right, let's reboot. Okay, so we've got our regular install, our rescue install, and now the Windows Boot Manager, which is located on the second partition. And so as you can see, we've just loaded Grub and selected Windows. And we're back to our desktop. So that concludes this video. In the next video, we're going to discover how to recover with Grub when device names have changed or perhaps devices have been swapped. Thanks again for watching. And this is George Scott with Linux Academy.